So I'm really happy to introduce Professor Parveen Ali, who will be talking to us today. And we thought it really pertinent to have a section on gender-based violence. And Professor Parveen has a wealth of experience, but I'll let her introduce herself. So thank you very much, Parveen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope you all can hear me okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My laptop suddenly sometimes go into some kind of, mad mode where the voice all of a sudden stops, and I've not figured out why that happens. If that happens, just please tell me, and then I'll have to go back or go out and come back again, but it gets sorted sometimes by itself, or sometimes we have to do the intervention of going it. So just kind of a heads up. I work at the University of Sheffield in Doncaster and Bassett Law Teaching Hospitals as Professor of Nursing and Gender-Based Violence. I'm a nurse by background, so therefore nursing, and my job around that is looking at capacity building among nurses, midwives, and allied health professionals. And my research is most of it is around inequalities in health related to gender and ethnicity and domestic abuse and gender-based violence. And that's what we are going to talk about here today. I was looking at the presentation earlier on, and then I was thinking that I don't know, because I'm a nurse and healthcare professional. So without you noticing it, it usually goes on to the healthcare professions. And then you start worrying about, oh my God, what if people are not healthcare professionals? So I've used examples which I'm using the terminology sometimes about healthcare professionals, but it's pretty much relevant to whatever setting you're working in as a social care professionals, or so anyone who is health and social care or teaching or supporting someone in a non-professional capacity in itself. So today we are going to talk about the an element which you may have heard about, coercive control. We used to do not hear words about coercive control. It still is a pretty new sort of term, but we were more aware of the terminology about psychological violence or domestic abuse or domestic violence. And this is in the context of that. We'll talk about this. Coercive control is a form of psychological abuse, and we will talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Anyone can experience it. So domestic abuse, men, women, people in same-sex relationship, people in heterosexual relationship can experience it. Men can experience it too. Women can also be perpetrators, and women can also be victims. But the most of the evidence suggests that majority of the victims, or majority of the people who experience abuse, domestic abuse generally, any form of domestic abuse, including coercive control, are usually women. And that's why we use when these discussions happen, it's usually about women, and that's what we need to be aware of and talk about it. But I think it is important to be aware that anyone can experience it, and we do need to be know that. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what we are going to talk about today is what is coercive control, how it manifests, cultural context, why we can't recognize it, what is the research evidence, and what is the practical guidance about it. So I'm going to look into coercive control, how it can manifest in different communities, and is there any difference? Is there any difference when it comes to different cultural context, or is it all the same, but we just give it different names? So let's look at what is coercive control. Next slide, please. So what is it? It is defined as a pattern of behavior seeking to take away the victim's liberty or freedom and strip away their sense of self. So as I said earlier on, when we used to talk about in the context of psychological abuse or verbal abuse, one form of psychological abuse was humiliation or verbal abuse, and kind of, and we did used to use the word control, but not necessarily coercive control. And it can take the form of all of these elements, but the bigger one is micro-regulation. So it's basically affecting somebody's life in a way that they feel their life decisions or their movement or their overall activities controlled by various different acts. This could be through the stuff like intimidation, threatening somebody, or you're having a fear of that someone could take away things that you like, and you may not be able to pinpoint as to how they have said it, but you have that sense that that's what's going to happen. A lot of the stuff that happens that is mentioned here happens in the context of love. So for example, isolation from family, friends, and support groups. It usually starts off with the stuff like, oh, well, because I like you so much, I can't share you with anybody else, and therefore you gradually and slowly start getting isolated from the people that you love, and you get away from them, and then it becomes really difficult to make that connection again. Surveillance, we all very happily go on and have the doorbells which has got cameras on, or install the apps where we could find each other and try and see where the person is, and things like that. But the appropriate use of those apps and everything is one thing, but it can easily start becoming a monitoring or tracking app where somebody is noticing you, where you are, how much time you've spent. If I use the example of doorbell, so who is coming at the door, what time did you leave the door, what time did you come back, what kind of dress you were wearing, what kind of clothes you had, what did you have in your hands, and all sorts of things, which then make you feel that somebody is micro controlling you, and you have to justify every decision that you're making in your life. And slowly and gradually it starts affecting individuals' ability to think about it. Next slide, please. So, up until 2015, coercive control was not seen as a crime, and I think the understanding of the coercive control is still limited. But up until that point, it was not existent. We did talk about in the context of control. We did talk about in the context of psychological abuse. But UK was one of the first countries where coercive control was criminalized in 2015, especially in the context of intimate and family relationships. And since then, we've done quite a lot of work in terms of developing that. So, for example, in 2017, more statutory guidance was issued to try and help people understand how do you identify and respond to coercive control. Because unlike domestic abuse, you don't really get injuries that you could see, physical injuries that you could see, or things like that. And even when somebody is speaking about it, they may think that they're not very confident if what they're saying is true, or is that what they're perceiving, or is that actually happening. The perpetrators are usually quite manipulative and quite charming, so it's often also is very difficult for other people to see if the person experiencing or the victim explaining it is that their perception, or are they actually seeing it. So therefore that kind of statutory guidance was really useful, which came in 2017, and since then the definition has been expanded, and it's included in Domestic Abuse Act in 2021, and it's been described as to what are the duties of the local authority, how can we look at the stalking and harassments and identify that. And there is continued pressure now for making sure that healthcare professionals and social care professionals are able to identify and respond to it, and their training is culturally competent, and they can help and support people from various different groups. Next slide, please. So how coercive control manifests? So some of these things we've already talked about. It manifests through psychological and emotional abuse, like gaslighting and reality distortion, and making somebody feel that you're the one who is thinking about it, questioning their sanity, questioning their understanding of the scenario that they're going through. It could take the form of public humiliation that the person feels, or threats to children or pets, or isolating them from networks. And we talked about digital or surveillance as well, monitoring people's phones, locations, looking at their kind of, the phone itself in a traditional way, or sometimes it could also be installing tracking and software devices in the control, in the phone, in the car, and other places, that then allows the perpetrator to know everything about the person moving around. It could also be about financial control, affecting somebody's decision to do the work or not to the work, to go for education or not go for the education, controlling their bank accounts, and sometimes what they spend on, what they are buying, how they are kind of, making those decisions. And sometimes even getting debt in the name of the victims, where victims are trapped into the situation in which they are and they can't seem to get out of it. So it often leaves no visible marks, but profoundly restricts freedoms and autonomy of the individual, and therefore they find it very difficult to. Next slide, please. And the invisible harm of it is such that there is 1 in 5 adults in England and Wales, according to Crime Survey England and Wales, who experience coercive control in their lifetime. And 95% of domestic abuse cases involve coercive and controlling behavior. So with regards to domestic abuse, we know that nearly 33%, 1 in 3 women report experiencing domestic abuse once in their lifetime. And if you look at the this figure, 95% of them have experienced controlling behavior. But the irony is that it takes people at least about 2 years to be able to acknowledge and then disclose to anyone about their experiences. Most of this is because they don't necessarily, there are no physical injuries or physical marks. So, they sometimes blame themselves. And that's why some of the reason why they don't leave, because they feel trapped. They feel like, nobody would believe them, or they are going to make things worse for themselves. They're fearful of it. They just think this is how the relationship works. This is how maybe I've done something wrong. That's why this is happening. Maybe I'm the person responsible for it. Maybe this is how it is meant to be. There could be issues around love, hope, and trauma bonding, or thinking that the person would get better. And sometimes dependency is created deliberately by perpetrators with regards to the life choices that the person make, or economic independence, and various other things. And as I said, because there is no physical injury, the assumption is there is no abuse. And that's why it takes them very long time to be able to acknowledge the abuse first themselves, and then to be able to disclose it to somebody else. And even then they find that a lot of people don't necessarily believe them. So they have to work extra hard to be able to then explain their situation to them. Next slide, please. And when it comes to different communities, I think one of the dangerous things that we could do is that think that this is how it happens in any one culture. Controlling behavior is not limited to any particular culture, but there could be differences in terms of how it is hidden within the family structures or dismissed as cultural differences by people who are experiencing themselves, by people who are perpetrating it, by the community members around them, and even by professionals themselves, because they just think that it's a form of othering and thinking, oh, well, this just happens in one particular culture or society and not the other. So within the South Asian society, there could be things like, for example, the concept of honor, shame, and izzat as tool of control, subjugating somebody to kind of, not exert their own power and be subjected to coercive control. Extended family networks enabling surveillance of somebody as to what they're doing, who they're talking to, where they're going, could be one example. Immigration status is used as a leverage, and pressure to maintain a family reputation is something that you may identify. These are the kind of, things which would happen, but the impact or the manifestation of this would be the control or the coercive or not being able to get out of that relationship, feeling of being trapped in that situation for individuals who are experiencing it. Within Black communities, it could be the thing about distrust of police and statutory services. To be fair, that's also common with South Asian communities, or particularly any community, basically. Community silence and peer pressure could also be one thing. This notion of strong women, I think, is again relates to every community, where we think strong women do not necessarily experience abuse, or they are resilient enough. And therefore they could not go through this, or we don't necessarily see them as victims. Fear of reinforcing racial stereotypes mean that people don't talk about it and don't take the support when they need to. And across all minoritized group, language barriers limiting disclosures, not knowing if this is related to their own culture or other people, if this is how relationships are, lack of culturally competent services where professionals are not able to ask appropriate questions or don't feel confident or competent enough to ask questions could be one of the reasons. Fear of deportation or a family separation, fear of children being taken away from mothers is also something that affects people's ability to talk about it. Intersecting operations, like this could be more than one thing, and that includes race, gender, class, disability, and all together these come to play to then have an impact on the ability of the victim to be able to talk about it. Next slide, please. So some of the dangerous phrases in safeguarding are things that we hear that we all should challenge, regardless of what situation or what kind of role we have. If we are health and social care professionals, or if we are just individuals or anyone, it are these, like, it's just their culture, because this happens in that place because no culture supports abuse. Abuse is abuse regardless of cultural framing. The other thing is cultural competence. Competence does not mean that you need to know everything about a particular culture to be able to ask questions. It just means to be able to know enough to ask appropriate questions respectfully. Professional anxiety and racialized double standards is another thing where we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to appear racist or we don't want to offend the other person. That's one of the things that has come again and again in research, which has an impact on victims because they then do not feel supported enough to be able to talk about that. The model minority trait, assumptions of family cohesion within some communities can mask serious abuse because we just think, oh, well, they live with each other, their family support is quite strong, and therefore this probably is not happening, or this is how they do it. But in fact, people could be trapped in terms of culture. So the bottom line is the culture, no culture is mandates coercion or abuse. I think it's important to understand that it is an abusive behavior and people would use culture or religion or anything that they can find as an excuse. And those who are in the position of help and support people need to understand that to be able to challenge that assumption wherever it comes around. Next slide, please. So what is it that acts as a barrier for professionals or other people's abilities to recognize and disclose? And there are three things that we could look into. One is survivor or victim related barriers, then community barriers, and professional barriers. With regards to survivors, it's usually thinking of kind of self-blaming, thinking I'm the one who's responsible for it. Maybe I did something wrong. That's why it is happening. Shame, stigma, fear of disbelief, and all the things that we just talked about a little earlier on. No reference point for what normal looks like. And economic dependence on the perpetrators, and sometimes the life situations, for example, pregnancy, having very young children, not having family support, could also be all barriers. When it comes to community, it's like pressure to keep family members private or not talking about it, honor and reputation concern, or thinking about this is how it happens in this religion or in this culture, those expectations. And most of the time, these are perceived notions that people have. Peer and family minimization, where people have told them that, well, you're over perceiving it. This is how not, this is not what it looks like. And maybe you're overthinking it, which then feeds back into survivor's guilt and thinking maybe I'm overthinking about that. And then, of course, professional barriers. Some of this we talked about earlier on, that, not wanting to offend, looking for the physical evidence of abuse or injuries or marks that then allows us to see if somebody is abused or not. Time pressure. You usually, clinicians, if I take the example of GP practices or nurses and healthcare professionals working in primary care or in emergency departments, you probably only get about 10 minutes to do a consultation, and it's quite a lot to be able to develop that rapport and ask the right kind of questions in a meaningful way. So time pressures could be one thing. Not asking directly could also be fear of making it worse is another thing that professionals don't necessarily always ask, or not knowing as to once somebody has told you what is it that I'm going to do after that are some of the barriers that professionals can experience. And this could relate to anywhere else. Fear of making it worse is very real. Yeah, definitely. Next slide, please. And the research has shared this with us, told us over time. So these are some examples from voices from minoritized communities through research. So they often talk about fear of intersecting consequences. Like he said, if I told anyone, they would take the children away or deport me, or, they would put me in jail, and they would just think that, make it safeguarding issues with regards to children. Or my family said I was ungrateful. They couldn't understand what he was doing. It didn't look like abuse to them because they couldn't see that picture. So family minimization, as I just said earlier on, and missed opportunities by professionals. So all of these things tell us that people do experience it, and that's their views about it. Next slide, please. What can we do? I mean, there are different key indicators which we can see in clinical and community settings, and you all must have read about them, heard about them, or may have noticed it. It is kind of most about like situations like somebody who's hyper anxious, hyper vigilant all the time. So something in their behavior which is different. If we talk about healthcare settings, it could be repeated presentations with injuries and stress and other things. It could be their partners being present in all the appointment, answering on behalf of the person all the time. And sometimes it could be just a normal kind of a language barrier, or the dynamics of one couple. But I think we do have to think a little bit more in terms of trying and ensuring that we give opportunity to speak and ask direct questions from the person that we are talking to. Sign of financial deprivation despite a parent household income, or victims minimization is another very common one, where they deny or attribute problems to themselves. Sudden social withdrawal or change in communication, if you see it in any of your friends or anybody that you know around you. Children showing behavioral changes of fear could also be a very common example. Missed appointments, maybe because the person may be prevented from attending, so that these could be a sign of somebody going through controlling or abusive relationship. Excessive deference in partner's presence, very different alone. So I think these are some of the indicators that should suggest that we need to try and do something different. Next slide, please. Asking the right question safely is something that we need to do. Create the right conditions, see the person alone, try and talk to them, where possible. If the language is a problem, use interpreters. Normalize asking question about relationships, routinely ask those questions so that it's easier for you to ask the question and it's easier for people to kind of respond to it. Name the behavior, not the label, so that people understand. So for example, does anyone in your home make decisions for you? Does anyone checks your phone or stops you seeing people? Things like that, so people could actually understand what has been asked of them. And follow the survivor's lead. Don't push them for disclosure. As I said, it can take up to 2 years for somebody to recognize and acknowledge it. And professionals get really upset about that. We've given all the information and they're not doing anything with it. But remember, any information that you give, any questions that you ask, has got a drip effect on the individual, and they eventually do make the decision to disclose and seek support, but may not be at that time. So don't stop asking questions. And of course, document what you observe and record and refer appropriately if you are in those situations. Next, please. Culturally competent response is cultural competence, as I said earlier, is not about lowering the bar. It's not about understanding the whole culture. It's about raising the quality of your response to it. So understanding the context without excusing harm is important. So knowing about lived experiences of services, but that doesn't mean that, cultural explanation is a justification of the abuse that a person is experiencing. We need to work with the communities, identify community organization, faith leaders, and advocacy services to be able to involve that work, but not for justifying it, but to be able to explore it with them and to find solutions for it. Address the whole picture of the person, their immigration status, their language, their faith, family. So all of those do play a role in terms of developing safety plans of what they can do with their with their situation, and how can how can they get out of it? And finally, challenging your own assumptions, reflecting our own biases, and what control means to us, what abuse means to us, what culture means to us, what culturally competent sort of response means to us, does help in responding the way we respond to other people. Next, please. Apologies, I'm just rushing it a little bit for the time. So this is just to give you an acronym to just to try and understand or remember the thing. So I've created, it's called respond. So R for recognize, identify behaviors, not just injuries. E for inquire, ask routine questions. Support, believe, validate, and provide safety information to the individual. Plan a safety plan, realistic safety plan with the survivor where possible. Observe and record what you have seen. Connect and network with specialist services and communities, and develop to build your own cultural competence and knowledge. So I hope this is useful. Next slide. So just to sum up, coercive control causes profound harm even without visible injuries. Cultural context matters, but it's never an excuse or explains away abuse. Professionals must develop both courage and competence to ask, and survivor and minoritized communities face compounded barriers, therefore our response should and must match. And small actions like asking, believing, documenting can be life-changing for somebody. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Parveen. That's absolutely brilliant. I'm not sure if you can see hands up.
I have a question for Parveen.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So informative, Parveen. Thank you so much. I was thinking, a lot of these behaviors, the person themselves might not see them, but other people see them. And when you try and talk to the victim, they kind of like brush it off, and you've explained a lot of the reasons why people don't acknowledge it. But for me, the key point is people are not leaving these relationships because of what will happen post exit. And so how do we enable that person to exit the relationship?
I think one of the things that we need to remember is that agency of the person themselves. You can't make somebody, you can help people see what's going on and you can help and support them, but you can't make decisions for them, because if you did, they would probably end up in the same situation again. So I think you're right. Sometimes you can, as an outsider, you could see what's happening, but the person themselves cannot see. Usually it's very the other way around, because the perpetrators usually are quite charming, so other people don't necessarily see what they're doing. It's the victim who see it because they live it day in and day out, but they probably go through the phase of, well, it may be me, maybe I did something wrong, that's why the person behaved like that. But I think it's that drip effect. If you see something, just ask a question which makes the victims think. You can't make a decision for them, but you can definitely be there for them to provide that support where they can open up and verbalize what they are going through or what they're experiencing without feeling judged. And eventually they come to that point where they have to make the decision, unless, of course, there is a danger to somebody's life or something else happen. In those situations, you do have to intervene and interfere. But otherwise, I think it's, as I said, it can take up to 2 years for somebody to acknowledge and disclose to somebody else about their experiences. So I think otherwise it's about being with them, ensuring that they understand there are people who support them and there are people who are there to fall back on, is something that we could do. And I think general awareness in the community would help quite a lot. And also this notion about he or she loves me a lot, that's why they want me to wear this kind of dress or not eat this or don't eat that. I think we just need to think a little bit more about how we set those expectations and relationships earlier on. But some of these people have to think and kind of, make decisions for themselves. You can't make it for them. I hope
Thank
that
you.
answers your question. Yeah.
That was a great answer, Parveen. And I'm really sorry we sort of just run exactly to time. So I don't know if anyone else has got any more questions. Maybe if you pop them in the chat, Parveen might have a minute or two where she could answer them in the chat for you. But thank you so much. I'm going to hand over
There
to
is one
Blair.
hand.
Oh.
There's one hand. Do you want them to write or just ask that question? There was one hand. I think it's just gone.
Where's it gone? Sorry.
Mm.
So I'm just going to hand over to Blair for the second half of this section.
Oh, it looks like we have Hannah who has put her hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to give a really quick thank you so much, Parveen. Coming from a cultural ethnic minority background, I think your talk has been absolutely phenomenal. And I wish there was more women out here who can hear you, because this is the first time I've heard an evidence-based talk where women can actually be empowered to say, because I think that kind of answers Sugra's question as well. A lot of times we hear about these things, and it's just really hard for us to even notice what's happening with us as a woman. And cultural doesn't support us, families don't support us. But I think you mentioning that this is evidence-based, that this could be a criminal case going forward, it actually enforces your legal case going forward as well. And that is something that would actually empower so many women to leave that toxic situation. So thank you so much. That was such an empowering, such an insightful talk. Thank you, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And I also wanted to say thank you to Parveen. More as a healthcare professional working in primary care, this lecture just fits in perfectly of what doctors and nurses need to know when they have a patient in front of them. So I think, Parveen, if we could have your lecture much more widely in primary care, it will make such a big difference. So thank you again on behalf of the primary care clinicians on this call.